Hello and welcome to today's Solar Town Hall. The town halls held last night and today are sponsored by Mid-Michigan Business and Community Sustainability Partnership. The partnership began last year with initial stakeholders with the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Union Township Supervisor, the Mount Pleasant Citizens Climate Lobby and Education, and grew to include others like Middle Michigan Development Corporation, CMU School of Science and Technology, Mid-Michigan College, DTE, Consumers Energy, and Homeworks Tri-County Electric Cooperative, among others. Membership is open and free for any business, organization, or community member who shares an interest in promoting economic development and community resilience through smart energy and sustainability practices. The partnership will be offering more programs like this one. There's a sign-up sheet on the table at the back of the room if you're interested for more information. Our presenters today. First up, John Kinch, who directs the strategic and daily operations of Michigan Energy Operations, known as MEO, a clean energy nonprofit emphasizing innovative and collaborative projects between the public and private sectors. Under Kinch, among projects, MEO has built a community solar park on capped landfill, one of a few owned and operated by a nonprofit in the country. MEO is also the solar consultant for the state of Michigan. Its Second Life solar project is launching in 2023. Kinch is a U.S. Department of Energy Sunshot Advisor and National Community Solar Partner, and a municipal certified solar expert by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He's also been a local clean energy consultant for the Council of Michigan Foundations and a renewable energy consultant for the Nature Conservancy. He serves on the Grand Haven Sustainability and Energy Commission, guest lectures and teaches at Grand Valley State University, and surveys secretive marsh birds for Audubon. Our second speaker with the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association is John Freeman, who's the executive director with a demonstrated history of working in the renewables and environmental industry. With his background as a former state legislator and practicing lawyer, he's working to expand renewable energy in Michigan. Megan Hunstead, a recent graduate from the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, where she received her master's degree in environmental justice and environmental policy and planning. She started as a summer intern and is now the Solarize project director for GLREA and works on an array of other projects for the organization. Our final speaker, Pat O'Boyle, is the Director of Business Development for Michigan Saves, the nation's first nonprofit green bank and Michigan's only green bank. Pat travels the state recruiting and training contractors on how to finance clean energy improvements. He also cultivates relationships with Michigan Saves authorized lenders and creates new relationships with potential funders, all while providing a high level of customer service to contractors, lenders, and home and business owners. Pat uses his energy, which seemingly never ends, to save Michiganders energy and money on their utility bills. Our moderators, last evening, Aaron DeSense, City Manager, and today, that's me, Michelle Sponseller, who is the Downtown Development Director. First up, John Kinch.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning. I have to apologize for that long-winded bio. I didn't realize it was so long, but then when I hear it read out loud last night and then today, I realized I should have cut some things. So apologies for that. I'm going to show a PowerPoint and talk my way through a little bit about what Michigan Energy Options is doing these days, who we are, and then kick it over to my colleagues and we'll have a conversation, as I understand today, focusing more on the commercial side of everything. Last night we talked more about the residential. A second here to share my screen. And is that screen visible for folks? Is it yes?
Yes, it is.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, again, thanks for having me. I want to give a shout out to Natalie Osborne, who's a board member of mine who set this up, and I appreciate her thinking of Michigan Energy Options in this context. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of exciting things in Mount Pleasant and the surrounding environs. Michigan Energy Options is a nonprofit, and I always want to emphasize that because we're mission driven. We have been around since 1978. We got going as Urban Options. Back then, we changed our name about a decade or so ago. I've been running MEOS since 2010, I believe. And we work around the state. We have offices in East Lansing, Marquette, and Grand Haven. And we do any number of projects and programs that include everything from energy efficiency work to working on solar projects. We work within the business sector oftentimes, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. We also work with utilities, we work with communities, and our mission is really to try to help people adopt more clean energy and have them feel comfortable with it, understand it, and see that as a value in their own communities. So I'm going to speak briefly this morning about several of the things we're doing that also have relevance to the overall topic about business and solar and commercial businesses and solar. Utility programs. So we are a contractor for a number of utilities and have been for a number of years doing energy efficiency programs for them, both municipal utilities and cooperative utilities. And that work has included everything from low-income energy efficiency programs to market rate transformation programs to whole building retrofits, you name it, we've been doing it. We're the ones who are oftentimes kind of white labeled in delivering rebates and incentives and setting up programs and running those. We've also been working with the investor-owned utilities to some extent, a little bit with DTE, and we've done a net zero pilot with consumers as well as a couple other things with those utilities. I always like to point out to audiences that we have 66 utilities in the state of Michigan, and we have 83 counties. And all those utilities, while they don't each have a different opinion about energy, they can be a different entity to work with. And certainly the cooperatives and munis are a little bit different than the investor-owned utilities, and we'll probably get into that conversation a little bit more as we go along. We're currently also advising a couple of utilities on their clean energy plans or their climate action plans or decarbonization plans. You can choose your moniker for those. And that's really interesting and exciting work, because what we're seeing is over the years is that utilities now are really starting, certain utilities are really starting to step out ahead and recognizing that not only do they have to decarbonize their own fuel systems in their own sector, they have to be thinking too about those communities and businesses and towns and cities in which they're located and work with those folks as well. It's been really interesting work we've been doing in the last decade or so around solar planning and solar development. And by that, I mean, we've been doing a number of projects that are sometimes citywide. We've done a solar study with our partner Elevate for the city of Detroit. We've also done solar energy analysis and feasibility studies for individual businesses. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as communities. And the community piece of this really manifests itself in a number of community solar parks that we've helped create around the state. The first one we were involved with was the Marquette Community Solar Park, working with the utility up there. The second one we actually own and operate ourselves through an LLC company in East Lansing, and that's been quite the experience of doing that. We've also consulted on other community solar parks, and we'll have a chance to talk more about that particular model going forward. But so I don't forget, the East Lansing project, which is about 400 kilowatts, is relatively modest size compared to sizes of projects today. But we have 150 individual members to that project, and a number of those entities are businesses. Some are institutional, governments and churches and museums, but a number of those are also just commercial retail businesses, manufacturing businesses, and so on and so forth. Now I screwed myself up by doing that. So let me call myself back here. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. We have spent a long time as a nonprofit in this space of building science, as it's often called. We have the technical chops to be able to do deep building analysis, something called ASHRAE level 1, 2s, and 3s, to understand how a building is functioning, how its energy is being consumed, where there's opportunities to put energy efficiency upgrades into the process, where there's opportunities to put smart systems in, where there's opportunities to change behavior, as well as integrating solar and other renewables into these kinds of projects. We have a client right now, a multinational client that's located in Michigan, that has very ambitious climate goals and decarbonization goals for itself, because it operates on a world stage. And so sometimes what we find in Michigan is that we'll have companies, individual businesses, that are further out ahead with their own decarbonization than perhaps a local utility or the local community. And so we're able to bring to them the analysis they need to know about what they can do and how they can be looking out into the future with any kinds of very sophisticated kind of modeling, from financial to energy savings to energy generation in the case of solar energy. Oftentimes, these businesses too are really instrumental in changing policy at the state level, because they do need to have access to renewables. They do need to have some of these kinds of things. And we're still in the hunt for renewables. We're still about middle of the pack in terms of other states in the union. So we have a long way to go still with our adoption of solar. While we can work at the individual building level, whether it be residential, which we don't do too much of anymore, but we do a lot of commercial buildings and analysis. And we also do a lot of institutional. By that, I mean governments, schools, places like that. We have done a fair amount of work over the time on commercial districts and thinking about how you can create, for instance, a district cooling and heating system that might be more efficient than having everybody have their own individual units, or where you might be able to locate solar on rooftops of particular businesses because it has a good solar resource there. This is actually an image from the Detroit solar feasibility study we did, and you can see that some of the rooftops are kind of a yellow color, which means they would make for good solar, while other ones are not necessarily that good because of their orientation or shading. And one of the ideas we've been pushing a lot of is this idea of locating, solar assets that might be a shared resource within a community, within a commercial district, in which, you may you may be able to locate it on a marginal land or brownfield located there. You may figure out some ways you can work together to both save energy and also to generate energy locally where it's being most consumed. I think that's about all I was going to say for my opening remarks. One last thing, new construction. We've also been in this space quite a bit with new construction and pushing for permitting and zoning and policy changes at the local level, so that new construction, if it's approved, would have some things such as be solar ready, if not even requiring solar on the roof if possible, or be EV ready. And now, of course, with beneficial electrification, we're pushing this idea that new buildings would benefit from being electrified from the get-go. Some communities are much further ahead on that than other communities. I think of Ann Arbor as putting something in place there. But we see the benefit of doing some of these kinds of things at scale, because when you have economies of scale, we'll talk about this a little bit with the group, prices go down and also systems just function a lot better. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for your attention here. I believe John Freeman, my colleague and friend, is up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kinch, John Kinch, for the introduction. It's wonderful to be on a panel with John and Patrick because we work really closely together. Both of them are on the board of directors of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. So I get to benefit from their incredible knowledge about financing and renewable energy, and they contribute to the success of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. I'm going to give a couple of minutes of introductory comments, and then I'm going to ask my colleague, Megan Husted, to talk about the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Solarize program. So to begin with, GLREA is a nonprofit organization. We've been around a long time. It was established back in 1991 as a trade association. So we are a membership-based organization, and we have two types of members. businesses that install solar and geothermal systems. And then we also have individuals that either have their own solar system or they support our mission as an organization. And what is our mission? Well, as a nonprofit 501c3, we primarily do education work. You know, we do events like this where we're trying to educate people about the benefits of solar, how they can save money, and how they can contribute to a cleaner environment, or how they can help contribute to reducing carbon pollution, which will reduce the risk of climate change. So we do a lot of education. Every Thursday night, we have something called Solar Stories or Renewable Energy Seminars, where we highlight a solar system or a geothermal system, or we talk about a policy that needs to be, that we think is important that people can learn about. But the other area that we do also is we do some policy work. We work in two arenas: the regulatory policy, which is primarily with the Michigan Public Service Commission. And then we also do legislative policy, which we work in the Michigan legislature. Both of these are incredibly important because, you know, a policy framework can be the key for driving programs forward. And one can point to the modern era, to the enactment of Public Act 295 back in 2008, which, you know, arguably started the solar transition, the renewable energy transition in Michigan. And so that's legislative policy. But the Public Service Commission also plays an incredibly important role because, you know, the way the utility model has been set up over the past 100 years is that the utilities have a monopoly within different territories. And because they don't have any so-called competition within these territories, you know, there is a commission set up within Michigan that oversees and has to approve rate increases or other things associated with the utilities. And so that's why the Public Service Commission, and they're empowered by state statute. I mean, their authority is determined from state statute, but they have quite a bit of authority to establish rates and to also approve what's known as integrated resource plans, which are essentially blueprints by the utilities on how they plan on producing electricity for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. So we intervene in those cases and we put forth our point of view, or we put forth counter arguments to what the utilities may be putting forth as what they want to see happen. Just like Mr. Kinch referenced that this is more geared for commercial, what Megan's going to talk about, the Solarize program, is equally applicable to small business or businesses. It's all about establishing a group buy program and trying to lower the cost of solar in this case, for businesses. But in general, the rationale for getting a solar system is the same, whether it's for a homeowner or for a business. Because utility costs, electricity costs, energy costs, especially for a business, tend to be one of the highest parts of the overhead. And when you have utility rates that go up almost every year with varying amounts, it's awfully hard for a business to develop a long-term plan for growing the business when their energy costs keep increasing fairly significantly. And so that's why we really encourage businesses, small business, large businesses, farmers, whatever, to think about getting solar. Because the great thing about solar is that once you install the system, you're pretty much in control. You will know what your energy expenditures will be, because the solar system is based upon what the historical use has been for electricity consumption, in this case, for your business. And so once you install the solar and it's producing the same amount of electricity that you used to be purchasing from a utility, it's pretty predictable on what your electricity expenditures are going to be. And having that predictability, I find, is something that business really wants. But the other obvious benefit for a business getting solar is the same as for a residential use. You're going to save money in the long run. You know, when you install a solar system, the cost of solar is all up front. And the panels, the solar panels are warranted for 25 years at a minimum. And so once you pay off your system by not having to pay a utility bill, then you're going to get much lower electricity. In a lot of cases, you might be getting free electricity for 10, 15, 20 years. And whereas if you compare what your energy costs will be for your business with a solar system versus what a neighboring business is paying from the utility, and again, their rates keep going up almost every year, then you can see how a business with solar is going to save money in the long run versus a business that doesn't have solar. So I'm going to turn it over now to Megan to walk through the GLREA Solarize program. But again, I want to reemphasize that this program is very applicable for business use as well. So Megan.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to talk about the GLREA Solarize program. John gave a great overview of what GLREA does, but if you are interested in learning more or even becoming a member, you can go to glrea.org, and there's a lot of great information on all of the different things that are happening within the organization. So John kind of got into a lot of great reasons already about why Solarize and doing a program like this is really important. Obviously, it contributes to a cleaner environment, and as he already alluded to, it combats those yearly rising utility rates. But a group buy program like this also promotes community relationships as well as supporting local business. And you can also take advantage of a group buy discount as well as the 30% federal investment tax credit. So this has kind of been touched on a little bit, but just kind of to further drive that point home that utility rates continue to rise. This graph here shows Michigan up at the top as having some of the most expensive utility rates in the Midwest compared to other states. And I know I was personally affected by all of the power outages that happened this past winter. And there's a lot of new reports coming out saying that Michigan is among the worst states for overall utility performance. So looking into renewable energy, getting your own solar system is definitely contributing to that resilience aspect as well. So what is the Solarize program? It is a community-based group buy solar opportunity that reduces the cost of buying solar. And so how it works is that there is a host or organizer that brings together interested people for a meeting. So this could be neighbors, this could be different business groups, this could be different church groups, kind of anyone who might be interested in moving forward with solar in your area. And at this meeting, GLREA works with solar installers to educate about the program and about the benefits of solar and any next steps for people who might be interested. And from that meeting, interested people can get a free estimate, and that usually includes a site visit. So the solar installer will come out, take a look at your property, and kind of give you a rundown on if it's a good site, the price aspect, all of those good things. So as I mentioned, the Solarize program is a group buy. And so how a group buy works is that the discounts are based on numbers. So this is just an example of what that could look like. A 5% discount could be given if there are 3+ new arrays coming from that initial meeting, 10% discount if there are 7 new arrays, and a 15% discount if 10 new arrays come out of that meeting. And these discounts are agreed to ahead of time by the solar installer. So it might look different depending on who is interested in being a part of this program. And the group buy usually reduces the price per watt. So from my experience, the average price per watt can be anywhere between $2.50 or $2.70 per watt, but definitely some outliers above and below depending on the situation. Every area is a little bit different. Every neighborhood's a little bit different. And individuals are encouraged and are free to get other bids if there are other solar installers that you're interested in working with. I have seen different solar installers still honor the group buy discount, even if the majority of the group goes with a different installer. And GLREA heavily vets installers, so we only recommend and work with people who have a great track record, really good business record. And if there's any specific questions, please feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to connect you with people or answer any questions or concerns you may have about finding your own installer. So this is just kind of a price example of what kind of the breakdown might look like. So this is kind of a ballpark. Numbers can definitely be higher or lower, again, depending on your own needs for your home or for your business. But a starting average price for a 6 kilowatt hour residential system in Michigan is around $16,000. You can apply that 30% federal investment tax credit that I mentioned right off the top, which already lowers the price. And then you can continue on with the solarized discount, which again has to be agreed to by the solar installer. And depending on the size of the discount, it continues to lower that price. And this is definitely kind of a motivating factor. The more people you get involved, the more likely it is that you're going to get a higher discount, which is awesome. So in this example, the total discount savings can be anywhere between $5,000 and $6,000. With this example, the cost per watt being around $2.66. So this is a lot of resources that we have. You can find these on the website or you can reach out directly. But these are kind of geared toward people who are interested in learning more about the program. So especially around frequently asked questions, looking at sample meeting agendas, different ways to get participants and installer recruitments, as well as just kind of a general overview. And the business directory as well can be found on the website with a list of installers, as well as other resources around education, finances, and a couple other things. This is kind of a snapshot of what has been successful so far across the state of Michigan with the GLREA Solarized program. So we've had over 20 meetings, over 375 participants, 96 plus estimates requested, with 33 of those turning into sales. But these numbers are already outdated. As I mentioned during this presentation yesterday, that we already have 11 more installations coming from one of our ongoing projects. So these numbers are going to continue to grow, which is really exciting. And these are kind of the areas that we have been active in. So these are areas that have either already had solarized programs, already have kind of initial discussions have been started. And some of these are cities that are interested in actually kind of sponsoring a similar program on a citywide level, which is really exciting. And Birmingham Unitarian Church is here kind of as an example of, it doesn't have to necessarily be your neighbors or geographic area. It can also be place-based as well. So your role coming out of this presentation is to hopefully become a host or organizer yourself, to get interested people, groups, businesses who may be interested in moving forward with solar, to get organized for a meeting. Or you can, especially if that's not something you're interested in or have the bandwidth for necessarily, you can definitely encourage someone in your circle or local government to reach out or to do this sort of program themselves, as well as just spreading the word about GLREA or about the Solarized program. And then definitely reach out for more information if there's any questions, if there's any interest, any concerns. I'm always happy to talk about the program and connect people to solar. So this is my contact information. That's John's email as well, if there are any questions. And I know there's time for questions at the end, so I'm going to pass it off to Patrick O'Boyle.
Good morning, everybody. Let me work on sharing my screen here. Hello, I'm Patrick O'Boyle, Director of Business Development for Michigan Saves. Eli is unfortunately not going to be able to join us this morning. He was with us last night. He's our IRA specialist. So if we have questions on that, I will do my best to answer them, but I may defer you back to Eli in the end to get the correct answer, not the synopsis version. Michigan Saves is a nonprofit green bank. Essentially what we do is we provide financing for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. So that allows us to do, for small business, house worship, municipalities, lighting projects, rooftop units, and then of course solar and storage. We've been in existence since 2010, and actually this slide I love to talk about. I'm so proud of my team that We are now going to close in on $500 million in clean energy financing in Michigan. Probably we'll hit that by about July. This is from the end of the year of 2022. We have a group of authorized contractors. We're just under 1,000 now within the state of Michigan. We only operate within the state lines. So all of these improvements and all this that we're talking about right here is just within the state of Michigan. We certainly have contractors up in mid-Michigan region, and happy to bring on more contractors if you know of somebody good locally that you would like to expand our program with their services. Essentially, you as a small business or a homeowner would select your contractor. They would give you a bid. And then on the residential end, we deal with credit unions. On the commercial end, we deal with commercial lending partners. We'll get to that in the next couple slides here. This is mainly a residential slide, but I like to leave it in here because while you may be a small business owner or municipality, you still have a home likely. This is our base program here. It is unsecured personal loan up to $100,000. The interest rates, because of the way we have leveraged the capital from the Michigan Public Service Commission, the Department of Energy, and now the state of Michigan, we're able to use their funds in a loan loss reserve situation to then lend private capital at lower than normal market rates. So you'll see these rates here are actually probably lower than you could do a 30-year mortgage currently, and do these energy efficiency or renewable energy projects at your residence. I do have here, I'll flip to commercial here quickly, or our business side. True Communities, our brand new partner on the commercial end. So right here at the bottom, True Community Credit Unions now offering commercial loans, 7% up to 15 years. And that's relatively unheard of on the commercial side of having terms to that length. It's very beneficial when you're doing solar. It allows for the ROI to work out, that it makes sense at this term. Prior to this, we only had terms typically up to about 84 months, and that would be a common loan for, say, a flat roof with insulation or HVAC equipment as well. Here's our commercial lending partners, other than True, because they have not even been added to the website yet. And why I have Team Financial up here in the corner is they work with us on doing interest rate buy downs with DTE and Consumers Energy. And essentially what that means, and this is not for solar projects, this is for energy efficiency projects. So LED lighting, rooftop units, again, reflective roofing, is the utility has partnered with Michigan Saves, or the utilities have partnered with Michigan Saves, and they will actually buy down the interest rate on a loan so you're able to do these energy efficiency projects. It's super effective. We do need to know what the rebate is going to be to know if they will be able to buy it down to these rates I have posted here. But it's an effective. Please just contact, if you have a commercial project that you are thinking about doing for energy efficiency or renewable, don't sort through our website and try to figure out the best option. Feel free to give one of us a call. I will make sure that Mount Pleasant has my contact as well as my other teammates' contacts. We will help you walk through that process. We can typically also refer some good contractors to you as well. Our website has a find a contractor link, but please don't hesitate to call us, especially on commercial projects. This is what we've done over the past 12 years. This is both residential and commercial are combined in this number. I use, again, residential in most of my day-to-day, but the commercial we've done about, I think there's about 150 of those 1,550 projects have been commercial, but the residential is the majority of our business. The battery storage, Todd Parker from my team created this little graph over here. It's being exponentially used more frequently in the last 3 years. So that's something that if you haven't considered, the other one that I don't throw on my residential side is EV charging stations is something for small businesses that we're seeing a huge influx in installations in that. And again, that's something we can absolutely finance as well. This is a slide that Mac from my team created. It's an electrification guide. This is, again, focused on residential, but it applies to a business as well. I think John Kinch hit on it a little bit, is making your business or your municipality more energy efficient is something that can be done. And this kind of walks you through that step of becoming more energy efficient. If your parking lot lights, for example, are not updated to LED lights, make that swap yesterday, because it will save you in the long run. And again, whether you use financing or not, that's something you should be doing immediately. I'm going to pivot over to my guy Eli's slides. So this is the Inflation Reduction Act. I think probably most people on here have heard of this. Essentially, though, it's a large investment into clean energy infrastructure in the United States. This is there's a lot of words here, and I'll make sure that this is made available to the team at Mount Pleasant, so anybody who wants to read through this is able to do this. But it focuses on disadvantaged communities and is going to lower energy costs to essentially make the improvements that we need to be making for a clean future. This is a cool one, and this does have a lot of commercial benefit to it, or business benefit to it. So the one of the main ones to think of is in this upper right area here, the tax credit bonus opportunities. There's bonuses based on where the projects are completed. There's still the tax credits that Megan mentioned earlier that are in here. But this is just it's a good overview of where the federal funding is coming from. Electrification, 12 million, 4.8 in the homes rebates. I'll hit that in a second. This is a good one to have available to you. Again, we're happy to send this out after the presentation. Greenhouse gas reduction one is kind of the hot topic these days. This is $27 billion that will be flowing downhill. It will come to the state level likely, but as in this one here, we can obviously the 14 billion in the National Clean Investment Fund. There will only be 2 to 3 awards, so that obviously likely won't come directly to the state level. We can talk about it more if there's questions about it. But the 7 billion over here to the right of the Solar for All, there's 60 awards. So hopefully we'll see that at our state level here coming soon. None of this has been 100%, the term, I don't want to say allocated, but the decisions have not been finalized of how this is exactly going to flow. We're hoping to learn more by late August, and likely will become available somewhere in late 2023 or early 2024. This is our contact info, so I will leave that up here for a second. I'll also throw my contact information in the chat as soon as I am done with the presentation, so I can do some more multitasking. Thanks to everyone at Mount Pleasant and John Freeman, John Kinch, and Megan for joining us. I will stick around for all the questions that may come up.
There we go. Hello. Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay. So next up is question and answers. So does anyone, before I get started, because I have a few questions, but do any of you have some questions for our panelists today? Yes. Let me bring the microphone right over to you.
Can the group buys be a mix of residential and business?
Megan?
Yes. I think as long as the solar installer has the capacity to kind of combine those two, I don't see why it could not be included.
And we actually had a conversation with the church where a church was looking to get solar for the church. And then a question was raised whether some of the congregants who want to get solar for their home, whether that could be a part of the group buy program. And we said, yes. So it's all about, quantities, of scale. I mean, the more people that buy solar at the same time, the more we can offer a discount to lower the cost to make it even more affordable.
For residential solar, do you have to go through a contractor? I was thinking about putting a system up myself.
No, you don't. I mean, there are do-it-your-own kits out there. But you do have to get a permit from your local unit of government to install solar. So you need to check into that. That is a service that the solar installer always does for the typical residential client. But if you have the skills, electrical, and you're not afraid of climbing on a roof, if you're going to do a roof mounted, if you're not afraid of that, it can be done. Once you install the solar system, then you need to usually get the local community to come and inspect it before you can turn it on. And then you need to run it by your local utility because they need to double check to make sure everything is done properly as well. But the essence of your question is, sure, you can do it yourself.
I was just going to say here in Mount Pleasant, I was going to give you a heads up. So building permit, because you're going to be working on the roof, and then electrical permit, which is through the county. So just giving you a heads up because we frequently have that somebody come for both to us. So any other questions?
I should actually say one more comment. Obviously, if you're going to install it yourself, you're not going to get the group buy discount through a solar installer. But the other important thing to keep in mind, though, is that the investment tax credit will still apply if you're installing solar yourself. You'll have to buy the panels, the racking, the inverter, but the 30% investment tax credit can apply to that as well. And what that essentially means is it's a tax credit, so it reduces the amount of federal income taxes you pay, dollar for dollar. And whatever amount of your taxes you can't eliminate for the first year, whatever is remaining can be applied for the second year as well until that 30% of the cost of the system is used up.
You spoke a lot about private homes and businesses and a little bit about municipalities. And I certainly have an interest from a personal perspective, but also bringing in a perspective of local government. And one of the things that we've seen in our ordinances is we continue to have to update those to allow for changes in the technology, taller solar arrays, rotating arrays, et cetera, et cetera. Do any of your organizations work directly with municipalities as far as working with zoning, building departments to help us encourage green behavior?
I guess I'll talk some more. Yes, we are actively working with local units of government to encourage them to embrace solar and renewable energy for the city buildings themselves, but also for their constituents. We are working with the state of Michigan, the Energy Office, to encourage local units of government to contemplate incorporating new software called the Solar App Plus program, which is free software from the Department of Energy that will streamline the permitting process, which can be an expensive, cost for solar installers. There's a second program called Sol Smart, which is there's a set of criteria that if different cities achieve in promoting renewable energy, then they get awarded by being deemed a Sol Smart city, and they're different levels. I think it's bronze, gold, silver, and maybe the upper level is platinum. But the other thing I want to talk about just for briefly is that there are a number of cities in the state that are undergoing sustainability planning. They're developing plans for their city, or it can be any kind of local unit of government, where they're trying to promote renewable energy within their community. They're trying to achieve carbon reduction goals in order to reduce the risk of climate change. And so we are marketing the Solarize program in particular to those communities because the more that homeowners or small business or even commercial businesses, the more they can incorporate solar or geothermal energy, the easier it will be for these cities to obtain their sustainability goals. You know, one of my big beliefs is turning loose the private sector. And that's what we're trying to do in terms of developing a policy framework within the state that really supports the expansion of solar for business and for homeowners and for farmers. And so if we get those policies in place, then we can turn loose solar installers or geothermal installers to market their products and educate people along with us about the benefits of solar and how they can save money and promote a more cleaner environment. So the answer is yes.
So
Thank you very much.
John Kinch may have something to add to it, but one thing I would bring up, and this is from a conversation last night I had, is listen to the people that are doing the work. You know, at least take their vote when you're doing it. So that I know that there's a certain jurisdiction now that's talking about limiting the height of a solar array to 8 feet, which is not going to be economically feasible. And the contractors that are doing this work are happy to work with the local jurisdictions of, you know, logical solutions, but you want to involve the people. And I think that's what John Freeman kind of alluded to. You want to involve the people that are out there doing this work, because that's who's going to help us get to the cleaner future that we're likely targeting. But John Kinch might have something to add because he's dealt with jurisdictions all over the state.
Hello, I'm not from the city of Mount Pleasant. I'm on the village council in Rosebush. We've had to work a lot with the turbines and people being very unhappy about that. And we've got a little inkling that someone's going to put in solar panels, which we're certainly excited about. That's not a problem. The neighbors came to the village meeting though and said, is there any environmental impact if a panel is cracked? Or where could we get that information to give to our residents? Because, go ahead, thank you.
Well, it's a good question. And if you're serve on this village city council, I really admire the work you're doing. It's a real commitment to be a public figure during this time of transition, because frankly, change is hard for most people. You know, people that are used to a certain way of things being done, when all of a sudden things are changing from coal plants and, you know, natural gas plants to solar and wind turbines, for some people that can be frightening. But to specifically address your question, part of the beautiful thing about solar is that the main element is silicon, which is a very popular element and it's very safe. There's nothing dangerous about it. You know, when you burn coal, you are not only releasing carbon dioxide in the air, you're also releasing particulate matter into the air, which really causes emphysema, lung cancer. There are, you know, hazardous chemicals that get distributed in the air. And obviously burning nuclear power, you're creating nuclear waste, which has to be stored for hundreds, if not thousands of years before it's safe. And even burning natural gas, even though it doesn't release as much carbon dioxide as coal, it still is harmful for the environment because it does add more carbon in the air, which is the main ingredient for climate change. The reason why, you know, renewable energy is wonderful is that you can produce the electricity we need to power our homes, power our business, power our farms, and we don't need to compromise by releasing toxic chemicals into the air. And the other key element of all this is that sunshine and the wind is free. All we have to do with equipment is to capture that energy. Whereas with a coal plant or a nuclear power plant or even a natural gas plant, you have to pay for the fuel, and then you have to pay for the equipment to take this fuel and to create electricity from it. With renewables, you eliminate the fuel cost, and you just have to address the cost of the equipment to capture it. Now, the only thing about solar panels is that their life expectancy is 25 to 30 years. And at some point down the road, we're going to have to recycle, you know, a number of these solar panels. And, you know, there are efforts undergoing right now funded by the state of Michigan to address how we can recycle these panels in a safe way that will not cause any detrimental harm to our land or into our homes or to our individuals. And so I'll stop there in case Patrick or John or Megan want to add any other comments.
Any other questions?
Oh, actually, I do want to make one more comment. And I meant to, this is in partly response to the previous speaker, but as well as the woman that just spoke. If you need help in devising solar ordinances or wind turbine ordinances, there is another terrific resource that I want to make everybody aware of. There is a professor at University of Michigan called Sarah Mills, and she got a grant from the state of Michigan to put together a guidebook on zoning ordinances and all the challenges of coming up with these kinds of regulations to guide the development of wind turbines as well as solar, utility scale solar. This guidebook is for free. She's perfectly willing to talk to you. She's perfectly willing to come out in person to visit with you to the city council or village council. And so I just want to make sure you're aware of this because she has a whole lot of experience in helping local units of government devise, new ordinances to reflect the changing needs for siting of these new energy projects. And it looks as though Megan has put something in the chat, which gives you a link to Sarah and the guidebook that she put together.
We can make sure that everyone gets that website afterwards. I'm sure we asked for email addresses so we can get that out.
Terrific.
Not a question, but I was here last night also, and I just wanted you to lift up, John, that 25-year, was it warranty or lifetime of a solar panel does not mean it quits working at that time.
I'm sorry? It doesn't.
It doesn't stop working. It just has.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, basically, the solar manufacturer, the beautiful thing about solar is that there are no moving parts in a solar panel. It just sits there. And so unlike other energy systems where there are moving parts, when you have a moving part, you have to maintain it. You have to, replace it occasionally. But with solar, it's inert. It just sits there on your roof or on a ground mount system. And so it's very passive, but that's a strength of the system. And so the panel manufacturers, it's universal across the world that these panels are warranted for 25 years. But just like the questioner, I didn't catch your first name, but just like she mentioned, that it doesn't mean that the panels after 25 years stop producing electricity. It just means that they're slowly producing less electricity. And what's fascinating about the solar industry is that because the demand for solar has jumped dramatically across the world, we're seeing really huge improvements in efficiency. In other words, for a typical solar panel, they've gone from 200 watts now up to 400 watts. So more electricity is being produced by the same size panel as compared to 5 to 10 years. So what that ultimately means is that you need less panels in order to generate the amount of electricity you need for your home or for your business or for your farm. And that's an incredible improvement. And we expect to see further improvements in this technology because there is a market incentive to see that we see more improvements because the demand for this electricity is so high for the reasons I've stated.
Sorry to come back at you. So I've been reading about, and I don't know the terminology, so forgive me, but dual-sided panels. Okay, so is that a proper term?
Yeah, that's fine. I know what you mean.
So my understanding from that is where you have reflective substrates, in Michigan, snow is an example of that, or you might have a reflective rooftop. Are those becoming more common? Or is the viability of those real, or am I reading agendas from certain parts of the industry?
No, I think they're real. Some are more real than others. Let me just rattle off three of them. Yeah, the dual-sided solar panels they're definitely real because, the further north you get in Michigan, you get a fair amount of snow, and on bright sunny days, there is reflection from the snow onto the panels, and that can generate electricity. So that definitely is real. And the thing that I want to make sure everyone understands is that, solar in some ways does better in the winter during the colder months than it does in really hot months. So up in the UP, where folks are paying 25 to 30 cents per kilowatt hour, which is significantly more than the lower peninsula, that's why solar is such a demand in the upper peninsula. But the key thing you have to do is you have to get the snow off the panels. But if the snow is off the panels on both sides and you're getting some reflection, onto the solar panel from the underside, that can in fact produce electricity. Another development which is more slowly coming to fruition are solar shingles for roofs. Elon Musk over at Tesla, they've been trying to develop a product for roofs where rather than putting the standard solar panel on the roof, the actual shingle, so to speak, for the roof contains the solar cell and it's serving a dual purpose. It's providing protection for your home or your business, but it's also generating electricity. That is taking a little bit longer for a viable product to come to the commercial market. The efficiency is less. Elon Musk has exaggerated how soon they will be commercially viable. So they're not really ready for prime time yet. But I do think down the road, they will be. And so you can just imagine, particularly when you're building a brand new house, rather than putting your standard asphalt kind of roofing on the building or some type of commercial roof, which is kind of a flat roof, you will incorporate within the building design, a solar shingle, which again will serve the same purpose. Michigan State, a third development, they're developing almost like a form of a paint or windows that will have, solar, the key element for generating electricity inside the panel, the glass panel, so that can serve as the windows or doors. So that's another kind of new building product that we expect to see down the road. And of course, the other obvious product, which is definitely here right now, are batteries. And Patrick has mentioned, I think John Kinch mentioned, that batteries are now being incorporated into a lot of solar systems. So when your system is producing more electricity than you can use, particularly in the summer months when the days are much longer than the winter months, rather than exporting electricity back to the grid and getting compensated by the utility, you can dump the electricity into your batteries. And then when the sun goes down, you can, take the energy from your batteries to run your home, or if you operate your business at night, you can draw from the batteries. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and it's known as a bifacial panel, and we're seeing it way more frequently on our end as well. And I think, as you alluded to, like a white reflective flat roof on your building, where you can gain that reflectivity, essentially 365 days a year. And I've even seen some individuals that are doing like light sand underneath the panel or the array. So therefore you get reflectivity from that. So no, that's a legit, you're not reading false articles on that.
The other interesting thing I'll just mention as an aside is that, a lot of farmers are putting solar panels in fields and they provide shade. And a lot of times they're planting crops in between the solar panels. And these are like vegetable type crops as well. And it turns out that the intermittent shading that occurs during the day can be beneficial for certain types of crops that farmers can plant. And so there are a number of really innovative things that are being developed out there. And again, it's all stemming from the fact that people can get the electricity they need at less cost, and they're contributing to a clean environment, but not, having to draw upon fossil fuel for generating the electricity. So that's acting as a catalyst for all these interesting developments.
Thanks. This is so much interesting information. Could you elaborate, please, on the net metering process for and payments and how that works for people that do have their own installations? And I think the utilities are moving, or have moved actually, to time of day rates and that sort of thing. So that can be how to figure that in for folks.
Okay, folks got to sit back and take some notes. Back in 2008, Jennifer Granholm was the governor, and she got enacted. It's called Public Act 295. And Public Act 295 was essentially the beginning of the policy framework that really is driving the renewable energy transition in Michigan. It did a number of things, but for the purposes of this discussion, it did two things. It established the initial renewable portfolio standard, which means that the utilities were required, this is in 2008, they were required by 2015 to have 10% of all the electricity they were generating. It had to be from renewable energy resources, primarily wind and solar. The second thing Public Act 295 did was it established the right of homeowners and small business to be able to install their own renewable energy system, primarily solar. But like I said a few minutes ago, there are times when your solar system is producing more electricity than you can use. And so this is before batteries. It still applies now, but in those days, batteries weren't real. So what you can do is you can export the electricity back to the grid, back to the utility, and then the utility will reuse that exact same electricity. They will, in effect, sell that exact same electricity to your neighbor, and they will charge the normal retail rate. But back in 2008, solar owners were compensated at the same retail rate that people buy electricity from the utility. The initial program was called net metering. But then in 2016, the legislature updated Public Act 295, and they changed the net metering program to the Distributed Generation Program, or DG for short. They ordered the Public Service Commission to re-examine what the amount that solar owners would receive for exporting electricity back to the grid. And the long and short of it is they decided to reduce it to 50% of the retail rate. So now, if you install a solar system now and you export electricity back to the grid, rather than getting compensation at the same retail rate, you're getting about 50% of the retail rate. And as the utilities increase rates in Michigan, your compensation goes up a little bit as well, but it remains to be about 50%. Let's go back to 2008. The other component of the original net metering program, which then transitioned to the distributive generation program, is that there was only a requirement that 1% of the amount of electricity that the regulated utilities produced over on average, the last 5 years, there was a 1% cap established that said that the utilities are only required to install as many solar systems to the grid and be a part of this net metering / distributive generation program that added up to be 1% of the peak power that the utilities generated. So what that means is that ever since 2008, as every new renewable energy system was added, that the sum total increasingly got to 1%. Now, the Upper Peninsula Power Company hit their 1% 3 or 4 years ago. Consumers Energy hit that 1% a couple of years ago. And then DTE is going to hit it finally this coming July or August. And what this means is that once they hit the cap, the utilities are no longer required to connect renewable energy systems to the grid and pay this current 50% of the retail rate for the extra electricity that is exported to the grid, unless the Michigan legislature changes the law. But putting that aside for a moment. So what that means is that the utilities keep insisting they're going to still connect people's new systems to the grid, but they will no longer be a part of the distributed generation program, because that program, as I said a minute ago, is limited to 1%. So rather than paying 50% of the retail rate, what the utilities, and particularly DTE, have proposed is to only pay about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, we oppose this effort. We've opposed it within the Michigan Public Service Commission, and we oppose it at the state legislative level, because remember, the electricity that gets exported back to the grid is extremely beneficial to the utilities. Number one, they can sell that electricity to your neighbor and charge the full retail rate. So we think it's utterly wrong that they want to pay 3 cents per kilowatt hour to a solar owner for their electricity, and then they turn right around and charge 17 cents in the case of DTE to your neighbor. We think that is utterly wrong, because DTE didn't pay to install the solar system, the solar owner did. And the second reason why this is very beneficial to the utility is that the more solar electricity they can reuse, particularly in the summertime when the demand for electricity is high because of air conditioning use, that means that they don't have to bring on their peaker power plants at times when there's high demand, because now that there's more and more solar electricity flowing back to them, they can reuse that and not bring those peaker power plants on, which tend to be the most expensive plants, which is why they only use them in a reserve capacity. So there is a benefit to the utility, because they're saving money by not having to bring these peaker power plants. So the bottom line, and I'm going to finish up with this comment, is that Consumers Energy voluntarily agreed to raise the cap to 4% and continue to pay the distributive generation amount for solar electricity, 50% of the retail rate. Right now we're in negotiations with DTE about having them raise their cap voluntarily. But if they're not willing to do it voluntarily, then we're also trying to change Michigan law to eliminate that cap off the distributive generation program. And this is a bipartisan effort within the legislature, because Republicans and Democrats, at least the majority of them, all agree that people should have the right to be able to install their own solar system, and they equally should have the right to be fairly compensated by the utilities for the electricity they export back to the grid that the utilities can therefore use. And I'll stop there. It's a lot of information, so if there are any follow-up questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
All the better reason that we have recorded this, so you'll be able to go back.
Terrific.
Hi, and last night you mentioned the Senate bills in Michigan about the community solar, which is key in the comparison with other states and how Michigan rates in that area, which is very eliminating.
Yes, and I apologize to my colleagues, Patrick and John and Megan. I don't mean to be talking so much, but yes, community solar is another extremely important policy that we have to enact in Michigan. And what community solar essentially means is that there are people that are unable to access solar because they live in an apartment, they live in a condominium, they live in a house, but the roof doesn't face south, or they can't afford the full upfront cost of installing a solar system, which can range from $10,000 to $20,000. That can be a major lift for a lot of low income, low and moderate, middle class families, working class families. So community solar will solve all those problems. And what community solar is that a third party developer will build a solar array in somewhere within the community. And individuals, businessmen, businesswomen, they can subscribe or purchase panels at this community solar array, and the amount of electricity or the value of that electricity that they subscribe to or actually purchase will then be credited back to through the person's utility bill to where they live, or in the case of a business, to the address of the business. And so we need a law in Michigan that frankly requires the utilities to work with third-party developers to put together these projects. Now, there's nothing stopping the utilities from doing it voluntarily, but in all candor, most of the utilities are not willing to do it because they don't like, frankly, to see customers stop buying their electricity and buying lower costing electricity from either their own solar installation or from a community solar site. Now, there are some examples, and John Kinch is in a much better position to talk about this than me, where the Lansing Board Water and Light, a municipal utility, has put together a very fine community solar project. And then some of the rural electric co-ops like Cherryland Electric, they've also done the same thing. But frankly, we need this law, and 22 other states have community solar laws that will enable, that require the utilities to work with these third-party developers. And one key point I want to make sure we recognize is that even though we're going to use the utilities billing system, they will be compensated for community solar to use their billing system. They'll get a little fee out of it. So we're all about having a collaborative relationship between developers of community solar projects and the utilities. But again, we need to enact this policy into law so we can drive the creation of this marketplace. And the goal, of course, is to make solar available to everybody in Michigan and eliminate any barriers, whether it's financial barriers, whether it's locational barriers. And I often, when I make my presentation, I often crack this kind of, I have a dream speech, a little tongue in cheek of Martin Luther King, rather than the standard, present when someone graduates from college or when someone gets married, why not be able to put up several solar panels at a community solar site and have those be given from a parent to a young couple who's getting married? We want to encourage them to stay within the vicinity of the farm or the business or the parents. And if they get, half a dozen panels, and then the value of the electricity those panels produce gets credited back to this new young couple, that's a great present because it's lowering the cost of them starting their own homestead by getting lesser costing electricity. So that's I have a dream speech and why I'm so adamantly in support of community solar. There are two bills currently being offered in the Senate. Once again, it's done in a bipartisan basis. Senator Jeff Irwin from Ann Arbor, he has Senate Bill 153. And then Ed McBroom, a Republican from the Upper Peninsula, he has Senate Bill 152. They're tie-barred together, which means both bills have to be enacted for community solar to take effect. But, we're lobbying, we're nudging these legislators to support these bills. And right now we're trying to put some gentle pressure on Sean McCann, who is the chairman of the Senate Energy Environment Committee, to hold a hearing on these bills and to hold a vote. And because we think there is tremendous support for community solar within the Michigan legislature.
Excellent information.
Back to net metering briefly. So if I understand correctly, if you do not have some form of battery storage on site and you're selling back to the utility company at, let's say 50%, a wholesale rate, and then evening comes and you're generating less on-site electricity, therefore needing to buy it back, you could be buying back the electricity you sold them a few hours ago for twice the cost. Is that accurate?
Well, yes and no. I mean, putting aside batteries for a moment, essentially, your Michigan law says that you are allowed to put a solar system on your home or business that will generate the same amount of electricity that you used in the previous year, historical use. And so, but there are times during the summer, like I've said a few minutes ago, where your solar system will produce a lot more electricity than you're likely to use. So you export that electricity back to the grid, back to the utility, and you're going to establish a bank account of credits, of electricity credits. So then when December and January rolls around and your system is not producing as much electricity as you need, you then can draw upon these banked credits to get the electricity back from the utilities, and you're not really paying for it in the sense that your bank account's been built up during the previous months with all these credits. So the idea is that over the course of a year, that the utilities in some ways is acting as a battery, but in a much more indirect manner. So your expenditure should even out over the course of a year. Does that make sense?
Excellent answer. That's the
Okay.
response. Excellent answer.
I have a follow-up though. How does that tie back to the comment that you made before regarding the 10% requirement for utilities to generate energy through clean energy?
Yeah, that's got basically nothing to do with the individual rights to install solar. The actual 10% renewable portfolio standard was increased to 15% as also a part of the 2016 update in the Michigan law. But the utilities had to meet that 15%, I think, by 2021. And they were all able to do that, So the current renewable portfolio standard hasn't changed since 2016. It's still 15%. But what has happened is that in some ways, that kind of incentive is no longer necessary, because the demand for solar has gone up so dramatically all over the country, Michigan, around the world, that because the cost of generating electricity through solar has come down, that it's in the financial self-interest of the utilities to build more solar and more wind and to replace electricity that's being generated from coal plants. Because like I talked about a little while ago, these utilities, they can't allow all this pollution from burning coal to go into the atmosphere. So they have to spend gobs of money on pollution prevention equipment. And then, of course, coal produces a lot of really nasty waste products, ash, that has to be stored in landfills that are properly designed so they don't leach into the groundwater. And obviously, this is a huge issue where farmers are growing crops and rely upon groundwater. But it's a huge issue in cities where coal plants exist as well. And so when you compare the cost on the marketplace of generating electricity through coal plants and having to deal with all the regulations preventing pollution versus generating electricity through wind turbines and solar, the marketplace has determined that the cost is so much less for solar and wind that the utilities have no choice but to embrace solar and wind. So they're above 15%. And, right now, every 5 years, the utilities must turn into the Michigan Public Service Commission something called an integrated resource plan, which is essentially a blueprint on how they're going to produce electricity over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. And the Public Service Commission has to approve this blueprint. And so this is where the utilities say, we're going to start shutting down the Monroe coal plant down in Monroe, Michigan, which is one of the largest coal plants in the country. It is increasingly becoming uneconomical for DTE to continue to keep that operating because, again, they can produce more electricity through solar and wind at much less cost. And that's what the market is determining. And that's why it's so important to maintain the right of individuals and business to install their own solar and geothermal, because this essentially is creating a new competitive marketplace, which is forcing the utilities to have to improve their operations, because otherwise, individuals are continue to going to buy solar and wind and not, buy the utility electricity if it remains to be super expensive. Does that make sense?
Yes. Any other questions from our lovely group today?
I have another question, if I may.
Of course, Manuela, jump in.
So I believe this question is to Pat. I wanted to have a little bit more information about energy efficiency and the programs and rebates that are out there for weatherization, insulation, and the kind of thing. So when talking about solar, I guess what gets people excited about it is the amount of time that you would pay the investment. And I wonder if there's any tool out there regarding those other building improvements that relate to energy efficiency that can just give folks an idea about how much money they're putting in to make their building tight, and then when they can kind of get that payback.
Yep, there's a tool that actually John passed along last night that I'd heard of but not seen, so we can certainly pass that along. But it's essentially the residential, the rebates are greater on the residential side than they are on the commercial side. The utilities do incentivize commercial updates to municipalities, farms, businesses, but it is at a lower amount than what the residents can see. As on the residential side, you can get or coming downhill now are some federal rebates that will be allocated to the state, and that will go. Currently, the incentives that are available are in the form of federal tax credits. So you would need, I think John Freeman talked about earlier, you would need a federal tax liability to be able to realize that. On the commercial side for solar, so the utilities don't incentivize solar installations on either the commercial or the residential side typically. Traverse City Light and Power, though, for example, does actually have a rebate for residential solar installs. So that's awesome, but not common. And then also available to, it's a USDA, so it's entire commercial projects, farms are one of the main users of it. There's something known as a REAP grant, I believe, and maybe John will know the acronym. I think it's Rural Energy Assistance Program, but that's something that they actually upped the, thanks, Megan, that they upped this year from 25 to 40%. So if you have a commercial application or a farm, that's something actually in the statewide individual lives in Ithaca. So he's pretty close to all of you up in Mount Pleasant, and I can get anybody that would like his contact. But that's an awesome program that if you're able to, it is a grant process that's 100+ pages, but to reduce your cost of a solar project or an energy efficiency project by 40% is sizable, because you also can do depreciation as well. It's a really awesome project. So I don't know, Megan or Manuel, if that totally answered it. You can re-ask me a separate side of that if you'd like, but hopefully that covered it fairly well.
Yeah, I think you covered it in terms of the existing incentives that are out there. But I was just wondering, I know that this is very unique to each situation. Each home is different. Each home has different needs in terms of increasing energy efficiency. But we were wondering if there's any kind of calculator out there that you can.
Yep, Megan dropped it in the chat right there. So that would be the one I would at least toy with at first. The other thing that if you're really interested in doing it the right way, there's something known as an energy audit, where an individual will come to your house or business and they can conduct an audit. On the commercial side, many times the utilities have individuals that will come out, and on the residential side, we have a list of auditors on our website that can come out and tell you kind of essentially your low-hanging fruit and how you should go about doing the improvements. So that's a very useful tool. It's usually a couple $100, and depending on who does it or what you're going to do after that, essentially sometimes they'll cover that cost backwards. But between that calculator and or energy audit is what I would suggest doing in that case.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Pat. As I understood Manuela's question, she was asking about return on investment examples for weatherization and aspects of weatherization, if that data is available.
It can be, but it's typically defined in a range. Like if you get an energy audit or you have it's known as a home performance contractor that comes in and does those evaluations, they'll usually say, okay, new windows, you'll have a return on investment from 4 to, and I'm making these numbers up, please don't quote me on these numbers, 4 to 10 years. Solar they can usually, the solar contractors, like the individual that was there last night, can give you a very good return on investment of your solar projects. But as far as insulating your house, switching to LED lights, going to a heat pump, heating and cooling system, new windows, that's something that you would want to talk to your contractor and or a home performance contractor to give you a range of when you can expect that return of investment.
My question is how many of these rebates, tax credits, incentives, grants are combinable, or I don't know if the term is stackable. And are there, some are and some aren't, or do you have any insight on that?
That's probably the most accurate answer, lack of answer, is some are, some aren't. Mainly, they should be independent of how you fund the project. So you should be able to, if you use financing or you use your credit card, or use it cash, you should still be able to get those incentives. But as Eli talked about us last night, is some of them will make it so you are unable to get the other ones. In many cases, the rebate and tax credit are both attainable in most cases. But I'm happy, like if someone in the audience or someone you know has these questions on a specific project, and this is something John Freeman was great about last night, and we all need to say, is education of these programs that's the most challenging part. And we, between John Kinch, John Freeman, Megan, myself, my team, we deal with this stuff on a regular basis. So don't hesitate to reach out before you do these projects to see if we can help educate you on the best path to reducing the costs as much as possible.
I know too, I remember this from yesterday, that 2 of the stackable kind of tax incentives was if the solar panels are manufactured in the United States, as well as if you're putting solar in a disadvantaged community. I think both of those give you an extra 10%. So that would be on top of like the 30% federal investment tax credit. Those are 2 that I know for sure are contributable to that base tax credit.
Wow, just having access to in one list, would be nice. Do you know of anyone who is, any site that is making all of as much of that information available as possible?
We definitely, Eli, who was with us last night, is working on it. Part of the hard part is kind of a weird way to put it, is that it hasn't been defined yet of what the rebates will look like later this year or early next year. But we, as Michigan Saves, certainly plan to put together something as soon as that is defined. And I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of organizations that are going to do the same thing, that as soon as this information is available or is set in stone, there will be resources available that are going to make it easier than it could look like this, or it should look like that. Again, as we mentioned last night, we were with the Department of Energy 2 weeks ago at a conference, and they're some of the ones that are writing these rules, and they didn't have the answers coming directly from them yet.
Right. And Megan put in the link for the Rewiring America IRA calculator, which I would put in a plug for. I've looked at that. rewiringamerica.org is one group that I think is following that carefully. But just with because the rebates are income-based, which we may not have covered today, when you put in your zip code and income level, Rewiring America, it just shows you then which rebates you're eligible for and which tax credits you're eligible for. And it's my understanding the tax credits are available now, but the rebates up front are the income eligibility guidelines affect those, and those are the ones that basically haven't been written yet and maybe several months away.
Yep, that's accurate. And your utility company also has rebates as well. So if you, depending on what most, I should say, have rebates available currently. So the utility company has rebates available. The federal tax credits are eligible. Now, it is next to certain that the rebates will only be effective in the future, that they will not be retroactive. If you put in a heat pump today, you will not likely be able to get the tax credit, or I'm sorry, the rebate once that is rolled out.
That you were mentioning the utility rebates, and that's one of the things I was wondering about as being separate money from the IRA money. So presumably those are stackable.
Yes.
All right. Time for probably one more question, if anyone has one. Going once, going twice. Well, thank you so much for coming today. It's greatly appreciated. Please make sure that you have signed in and we have your email address so we can let you know of future events such as this. If you think of other questions, reach out, let us know. We can always follow up in an email as well. So thank you so much today. And big round of applause to all of our panelists today. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention today. We appreciate it. And that's it, everyone. Thank you so much. And there are cookies.
Have a great day.
Thank you.